The dark expanse of space was still, unfeeling, a place of silence, and in the silence, humanity had prepared. The silent Vanguard, Earth's last line of defense, was not a fleet of great battleships or titanic war machines. It was something far more dangerous, a network of stealth ships, a hidden force with the ability to strike before the enemy even knew it was under attack. But for all their power, their silence was their greatest weapon and their curse. They were unseen, unknown, their existence nothing but whispers among the elite military leaders and a select few. Captain Ilarinova stood at the bridge of the Vanguard's flagship, Vigilance, her eyes scanning the holographic display of the solar system. The crew was silent around her, each member a part of this vast machine, prepared for what they hoped would never come. But Ilara had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and something had changed in the void. A signal, faint but unmistakable. It had been there for weeks, a strange pattern in deep space, something that no human ship had sent, something that couldn't be explained away by natural phenomena. The Vanguard's long-range sensors had caught it first, a cryptic message embedded in frequencies no one else had detected. At first, it had seemed like nothing more than a glitch, a fluke. But as Ilara's team traced the signal back, it became clear this was no accident. A shadow fell over the bridge as a voice spoke from the communication station, breaking the stillness. "Captain, we've intercepted a new transmission. It's coming from the edge of the Oort cloud. Definitely not ours. Could be alien." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Alien. The word had never felt more ominous. Humanity had been at peace for a generation, but peace, she knew, was fragile, especially in the cold, uncaring vastness of space. "Play it," she ordered, her voice steady. She couldn't afford to let fear show. Not now, not when everything was at stake. The message crackled through the speakers, an alien tongue, incomprehensible to any human ear. But then, something cut through the static, a chillingly clear phrase, repeated over and over again. "Earth, you are ours." The message wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a diplomatic overture. It was a declaration of war. Ilara's fist clenched around the armrest of her chair. The Arakthi, she'd heard the rumors, whispers of a race capable of bending entire star systems to their will. But this wasn't just a threat in the form of a warning. This was a countdown. The Arakthi had come for Earth, and they had come prepared. The crew exchanged nervous glances. The Vanguard was humanity's greatest weapon, but they had always operated in secrecy. Now that secrecy was about to be exposed in a way they couldn't have imagined. Ilara turned toward her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes, his face as grim as hers. "It's them, isn't it?" Hayes asked, his voice barely audible over the static. "It is," Ilara confirmed, her voice hard as steel. "The Arakthi are here, and they've come for us." Ilara quickly activated the Vanguard's secure communications channel, sending an encrypted message to Earth's highest command. The response was swift, but to Ilara's frustration, it was not the reassurance she had hoped for. There was confusion, debate, denial. The governments of Earth hadn't prepared for an invasion. They'd put their faith in diplomacy and the idea that the galaxy had no interest in Earth. But the Vanguard had been waiting for this day, the day they would strike without warning, the day they would protect humanity from an enemy no one was ready to face. Ilara knew there was no time for waiting. She stood and turned to her crew, her voice unwavering. "The Arakthi won't wait for us to prepare. We'll strike first. Get the Vanguard ready for action. We leave in 2 hours." The crew moved swiftly, each member going to their stations with purpose. There was no room for hesitation. The time for debate was over. The time for action had come. As the Vigilance powered up and slipped into the shadows of deep space, Ilara knew one thing for certain. Humanity's survival depended on the Vanguard, and it had no room for failure. The hunt had begun. The Vigilance slipped silently into the dark folds of space, its cloaking field active, rendering it nearly invisible to all but the most advanced alien scanners. The Vanguard's stealth technology was the crown jewel of humanity's defense, a method of war built not on brute force, but on subtlety, precision, and speed. In this moment, Alara could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The fate of Earth was in their hands, and the only way to succeed was to strike fast, hard, and without warning. The crew worked in synchrony, each task a thread in a much larger tapestry. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was already coordinating with the rest of the Vanguard fleet, a network of ships hidden in the far reaches of the solar system, ready to strike as soon as Alara gave the signal. Their mission: to cripple the Arakthi's communications network, severing their command from the rest of their invasion force. If they could do that, it would buy humanity some precious time to regroup. But as Alara stood on the bridge, watching the cold void stretch out ahead of them, a creeping sense of unease lingered. The Arakthi had been preparing for this moment for far longer than humanity had been aware. Every warning from deep space, every intercepted message now took on a darker meaning. This invasion wasn't an impulsive decision, it was part of a calculated plan. The Vanguard's first mission, their first strike, would be against an enemy who was already poised to respond. "Captain," Hayes' voice broke into her thoughts. "We've detected a small fleet in orbit around Europa. It looks like an advanced scouting force. They're not part of the main fleet, but they're definitely Arakthi." Alara's mind raced. The Vanguard's mission was to remain undetected, to strike at the heart of the Arakthi's infrastructure without alerting the enemy. But now, with the scouting force lurking in the shadows, any movement could reveal their position. If they were spotted now, the whole plan could be compromised before they even reached their target. "Can we take them out without being detected?" Alara asked, her voice calm but sharp. "We'll have to be precise," Hayes replied. "We could disable their ship's engines and send them drifting into Jupiter's atmosphere. They'll have no way to warn the main fleet if we keep their comms offline." Alara nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. "Get the fleet ready for action. We'll move in on the fleet and hit them hard. The Vanguard is silent, and they won't know we're coming until it's too late." Moments later, the Vigilance and two other Vanguard ships slipped into position. The stealth ships blended seamlessly with the dark expanse of space, invisible even to the Arakthi's sophisticated scanners. They were within striking range of the enemy, and Alara's pulse quickened as she prepared for the operation. A soft alarm beeped across the bridge, signaling that they were close to the target. "On my mark," Alara said, her voice steady and commanding. "All systems are go. Hit them fast. Hit them hard." With the signal given, the Vanguard moved with terrifying efficiency. Alara's heart raced as her fleet sprang into action. The enemy didn't stand a chance. The first Arakthi ship didn't even know they were under attack until its engines were obliterated in a series of precisely timed pulses from the Vanguard's weapon systems. The ship's comms were scrambled, and its crew was disoriented as it drifted toward Jupiter's atmosphere, helpless to fight back. The second ship didn't even have the time to sound an alarm before it was disabled. The third ship was the most difficult. A larger, more advanced vessel, it fought back with a strength the Vanguard hadn't anticipated. Shields flared as energy blasts struck the Vigilance hull, rocking the ship with a force that rattled the crew. But Alara knew this was the test. They had to maintain their silence, keep the fight contained, and avoid alerting the rest of the fleet. "Steady," she barked, her hands gripping the console as the Vigilance wove through incoming fire. The enemy's ship was strong, but the Vanguard was faster. They maneuvered through the firestorm, positioning themselves for the killing blow. With a final precise shot, the Vanguard disabled the enemy ship's main reactor, rendering it a lifeless husk in the void. The Vigilance and its companions retreated into the shadows of space, undetected once again. The mission had been a success, but Alara's eyes didn't shine with victory. Instead, She stared into the blackness ahead, knowing that this was just the beginning. The Arathi were already adapting, and the next strike wouldn't be so easy. "Prepare for Phase 2, she ordered. "This fight is far from over." The Vanguard slipped away, a whisper in the void, its shadow still lingering over the Arathi advance. Earth was unaware, but the Vanguard had already begun its silent war. The silence on the Vigilance was thick, a heavy cloak that hung over the crew. The ship had just completed a successful mission, crippling the Arakhi's scouting forces, but Ilara knew this fragile calm wouldn't last. Every strike the Vanguard made, every enemy ship they neutralized, only brought them closer to the inevitable confrontation with the Arathi main fleet. And yet, beneath the calm exterior of her crew, there was an unease that Ilara could feel, a whisper of suspicion. She couldn't ignore it. The feeling deepened when her comms officer, Lieutenant Ishari, called her to the command deck. "Captain, there's something you need to see." A message just came through from Fleet Command. Ilara nodded and followed Aisha to the communication station. The officer handed her a data pad with an encrypted message, sent directly from the highest command structure on Earth. As Ilara read it, her brow furrowed. The message was brief, but its implications were impossible to ignore. Earth had received intel that some factions within the Vanguard had begun to question the secrecy of their operations. Some were even advocating for a more conventional military approach. But the most troubling part was the last sentence. "We have reason to believe there is a mole within the Vanguard. Proceed with caution." Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had long trusted her crew, each one handpicked for their loyalty and skill. But the sudden shift in tone from Fleet Command sent a ripple of doubt through her. Someone on the Vigilance was betraying them, or at least that was what Earth was suggesting. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. "Who?" The truth was, Ilara couldn't afford to be paranoid. If someone had been compromised, it could unravel everything. She turned to Aisha, her voice low but urgent. "Have all communications and intel from Fleet Command run through secondary channels from now on. I don't want anything getting through that could be compromised." Aisha nodded and immediately began working, but Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That evening, during a routine debriefing, Ilara's suspicions began to take form. Her senior officers were gathered around the table, analyzing data from their latest strike. As Ilara briefed them on the next target, an Arathi relay station deep in the Kuiper Belt, she noticed Lieutenant Cassius, her second-in-command, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Cassius had always been calm, unflappable even under the most intense pressure. But tonight, there was something off about him, something she couldn't place, but that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. He was quieter than usual, his eyes darting to the others, almost as if he were calculating something. Ilara dismissed the thought, but it lingered like a shadow. "We need to be ready for anything," she said to the team. "The next mission is going to be the most critical. If we can knock out their primary comms, it'll delay the main fleet's assault for weeks. We can't afford any mistakes." The team nodded, but Cassius remained silent. His face was unreadable. Later that night, Ilara found herself pacing in her quarters, unable to shake the growing feeling of unease. Her mind kept circling back to Cassius. There had been a time when she would have trusted him with her life. He had been with her since the early days of the Vanguard's formation, loyal, always there when needed. But loyalty could be a fleeting thing, especially in times of war. She decided to confront him. Ilara made her way to the crew quarters, her footsteps echoing down the narrow, dimly lit corridors. When she reached Cassius's door, she hesitated for a moment before pressing the comms button. "Cassius, open up," she ordered. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Cassius stood there, his face expressionless. "Captain?" Ilara stepped inside, her eyes narrowing. "Something's wrong, Cassius? You've been distant, more than usual. Talk to me?" Cassius didn't immediately respond, his gaze dropping to the floor. There was an awkward pause before he finally spoke, his voice almost too calm. "I'm just focused on the mission, Captain. You've been pushing us hard. Everyone is feeling the pressure." "I'm not buying it," Alara said, stepping closer. "There's something you're not telling me, and I need to know what it is." For a moment, Cassius said nothing. Then, without warning, he turned and reached for the hidden compartment in his quarters, a compartment Alara hadn't known about. Her instincts screamed at her to stop him, but it was too late. As Cassius revealed a small, encrypted data chip and placed it into a nearby console, Alara's blood ran cold. The chip flickered to life, displaying a series of communications, conversations between Cassius and someone off-ship. "Someone Arakthe?" "Cassius," Alara whispered, the realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. "You've been feeding them our plans." The betrayal was clear. Cassius's face, once a mask of calm, now twisted into something darker, something colder. The trap had been set, and now Alara realized with chilling clarity they were all playing into the enemy's hands. "You've been compromised," Alara said, her voice laced with disbelief and anger. Cassius met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Before he finally spoke, his tone devoid of emotion. "It was never personal, Alara. Just business." And just like that, everything had changed. Alara stood frozen in the dimly lit room, her mind racing as the weight of Cassius's betrayal sank in. The encrypted data chip in her hand felt like a lead weight. Her trusted second-in-command, the man who had been at her side from the beginning, was working for the Arakthe. And now, everything they had built, the trust, the silent war, the Vanguard, was in jeopardy. Cassius watched her closely, his eyes cold, almost calculating, as if he were waiting for her to react. But Alara was beyond shock now. It wasn't disbelief that held her, but an icy fury. How could he have done this? How could he have so completely betrayed them? The silence between them was thick, but it was broken by the hum of the ship's communication system, signaling an incoming message. Alara's grip tightened on the chip as she turned to the console, her mind already processing the possibilities. The Arakthe were coming, and Cassius had just handed them a direct line to everything the Vanguard was planning. The message blinked on the screen, an unknown transmission from an external source. Alara's pulse quickened as she realized that the communication wasn't just a routine check-in. It was a direct response to the data Cassius had just sent. "Play it," she ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. The screen flickered, then displayed the face of an alien. Its features were angular, its skin a deep shade of violet, and its eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light. The Arakthe were known for their intimidating appearance, but this one's presence felt different, more calculated, more human-like in its composure. "Captain Nova," the alien spoke, its voice deep and unsettlingly calm. "We have been watching you. Your people are efficient, and your strategy's clever, but your time is running out." Alara's breath caught, so they knew. The Arakthe continued, its voice cold and unforgiving. "Your mole, Cassius, has been a valuable asset. His actions have already set the stage for our next move. But rest assured, Captain, there is no escape. You will fall just as the others before you." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving Alara with nothing but the echo of its chilling words. Cassius's betrayal was more than just a personal blow. It had compromised their entire plan. The Arakthe were ready to strike. Cassius, however, remained unmoved. He took a slow step toward her, his gaze never leaving her face. "You never understood, did you? The Vanguard was never your victory. It was always the Arakthes. They're the true power in this galaxy, Captain. And now you've helped them take the first step to their domination." Alara's heart pounded as she looked at him. She wanted to lash out, to tear him apart for what he'd done, but there was no time for rage. There were far more pressing matters at hand. With a sharp motion, she turned on her heel and strode toward the door. I won't let you win, Cassius. No matter how deep you've embedded yourself with them, we will stop you. Cassius's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real emotion. You've already lost, he said, his voice carrying a finality that stung. The Vanguard is already compromised. Your fleet is scattered, and the Arachthi will crush you in a matter of hours. You won't even see the end coming. Alara didn't respond. She couldn't. There were no more words to exchange. As she reached the door, she turned one last time to face him. You've made your choice. But know this, no one, not even the Arachthi, will be able to save you when this is over. Without waiting for his response, Alara stormed out of the room and headed for the command deck. The time for words was over. Now, she needed to act. The crew was already in motion, preparing for the worst. Alara could feel their eyes on her as she took her place at the center of the bridge. The mood had shifted. There was no longer the calm confidence they'd once had. Instead, the crew now wore the weight of their leader's decision, an undeniable awareness that the enemy had breached their ranks. Ilara's mind raced. The Vanguard's plans had been compromised, but there were still contingencies. They could still make a move, disrupt the Arachthi before they had the chance to consolidate their advantage. But time was running out. The next few hours would determine everything. We can't wait for orders, she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. Cassius has betrayed us, but that doesn't mean we're out of options. We have one chance to strike first, before they can fully organize. Captain, Lieutenant Rhee spoke up, her voice tight with fear, but filled with resolve. The Arachthi have already moved into position around our fleet's outer rim. They'll launch an assault within the next 6 hours. Ilara's thoughts turned dark. They had to act now, or they would lose everything. Then we hit them hard. Assemble all available ships. We're going to strike directly at their command center. We'll take down their central fleet network, even if it costs us everything. The crew nodded in silent understanding. They knew this mission would likely be their last, but Ilara had never asked them to follow her without knowing the stakes. They were warriors, and they would fight until their last breath. Launch in 30 minutes. Make it happen, Ilara ordered. As the ship's engines roared to life and the Vigilance began to move toward its target, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that the final battle had already begun. There would be no warning, no time for second guesses. They would strike in the dark, with the weight of humanity's survival on their shoulders. The silent Vanguard would not fail, not today. The Vigilance cut through the dark expanse of space with a deadly precision, its cloaking systems rendering it invisible to enemy scanners. The crew moved like well-oiled machinery, each officer focused on their task. They had just over 5 hours until the Arachthi launched their full-scale assault, and Ilara knew that every second counted. This was their only chance to strike before the invasion became unstoppable. The tension in the air was palpable. The bridge crew had rallied behind her decision, but there was no mistaking the sense of dread that had settled over them. No one spoke of it directly, but they all knew the stakes. This mission could very well be their last. The Arachthi had already breached their defenses once, and now, with Cassius's betrayal, they were walking into the heart of the enemy's forces with nothing but their will to fight. Ilara's hands gripped the armrests of her command chair as she stared at the tactical map unfolding before her. The Arachthi fleet was massive, an array of warships encircling the Vanguard's remaining forces like a tightening noose. The only hope they had was to blindside them, strike at their command center before the enemy could fully organize. But the risks were enormous. The Arachthi's central hub, located in the heart of the asteroid belt, was heavily fortified, and they knew they'd be up against the full might of the alien forces. Captain, all ships are in position, Lieutenant Hayes called out from his station. We're ready to initiate the strike as soon as you give the word. Ilara nodded, her expression hardening. We move in now, no hesitation. The plan was simple. Take out the central communications hub, disrupt their command structure, and then pull back. It wasn't a victory, but it was a chance to cripple the Arakthi's momentum. The Vigilance would lead the charge, followed by the smaller stealth ships. They would approach under cloak, silent as shadows, and then unleash everything they had on the central hub in one brutal strike. The hope was that the enemy wouldn't know what hit them until it was too late. Initiating Phase 1, Ilara said, "All ships, power up your weapons. Prepare to decloak on my mark." The seconds stretched into minutes as the crew worked in perfect unison, weapons powered and systems primed. Ilara's heart raced. This was it. There would be no turning back. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made, every person who had trusted her to lead them, and the cold reality of what failure would mean. "Phase 1 complete," said Ree, her voice tight. "We are cloaked and on course." "Decloak in 3, 2, 1, now," Ilara commanded. The Vigilance and the other ships deactivated their cloaking systems simultaneously, revealing themselves to the enemy in a flash. For a brief moment, there was silence, a pregnant pause before the storm. Then, chaos. The first salvo hit the Arakhthi command center with explosive force. Weapons fire tore through the asteroid field, splintering rock and metal as the Vanguard unleashed everything they had. The shockwaves reverberated through space, rattling the ships and pushing them to their limits. The Arakhthi, caught off guard by the sudden strike, scrambled to react, their defensive systems faltering for a crucial moment. It was the opening the Vanguard needed. "Targets locked," Lieutenant Hayes shouted. "Weapons primed. We've got a clean shot at the command hub." Ilara's pulse quickened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. She held her breath as she watched the countdown on the tactical display. If they could hit the hub now, the Arakthi's coordination would be thrown into disarray, buying humanity precious time to regroup. "Firing," Hayes yelled. The Vanguard's weapons lit up, sending a barrage of high-energy plasma bolts toward the central hub. The strikes hit with deadly accuracy, tearing through the hub's shields and battering its core. For a moment, the Arakhthi seemed paralyzed, unable to respond with the speed they had once shown. The comms network went silent as the first of their ships began to lose contact with the central command. "We've got them on the ropes," Ilara shouted. "Keep the pressure on." The Vigilance continued its assault, but something wasn't right. Ilara could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a shift in the air, a tension she couldn't explain. The Arakhthi weren't reacting the way they should. They weren't scrambling to retaliate. They were adapting. Before she could voice her concern, the first counterattack came. The asteroid field erupted in a flurry of explosions as hidden Arakhthi ships decloaked and fired upon the Vanguard fleet. They had been lying in wait, waiting for the exact moment the Vanguard made its move. The Vigilance was rocked by the first blast, sending Ilara's body slamming into the console in front of her. She fought to stay upright, the pain from the impact momentarily blurring her vision. "Shields down to 30%. Ree shouted from the comm station. "We've been hit hard." "Pull back," Ilara ordered, her voice hoarse but firm. "Get us out of here now." The Vigilance lurched as the ship powered up its engines, trying to escape the incoming fire. The other ships in the Vanguard fleet followed suit, but the Arakhthi weren't letting them go that easily. "Captain, we've got more enemy ships closing in from behind," Lieutenant Hayes warned. "They've adapted faster than we anticipated. We're trapped in the asteroid belt." The battle raged on, but Ilara knew they were losing the initiative. Their window of opportunity had closed. The Arakhthi were organized now, and they were about to let the Vanguard slip away so easily. The price of this strike was much higher than Ilara had ever imagined. "We're not done yet," she said, gritting her teeth. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We fight through this." The Vigilance surged forward, cutting through the storm of enemy fire. The battle for survival had only just begun. The Vigilance rocked violently as the Arakthi's return fire pummeled its shields. Ilara gritted her teeth, barely able to hold herself upright as the bridge crew worked furiously to keep the ship intact. Sparks flew from several consoles, and the shrill whine of the damage alarms reverberated through the narrow corridors of the vessel. Their initial strike had bought them only moments of success before the full wrath of the Arachthi fleet descended upon them. "Shields down to 12%, Captain," Lieutenant Ree shouted from the comm station, her face drawn and tense. "We can't keep taking hits like this." Ilara's mind raced. Their initial plan had been bold and calculated: strike fast, hit the heart of the enemy fleet, and pull back before they could retaliate. But now they were trapped in a killing field of asteroids, with the Arachthi closing in from all sides. The enemy fleet was relentless, their ships adapting at an astonishing pace, cutting off any avenue of retreat. "Captain," Hayes's voice was urgent. "We've got 2 enemy dreadnoughts closing on our 6. They'll be in firing range in 60 seconds. Ilara's jaw tightened. The Vigilance was outgunned, outnumbered, and surrounded. They couldn't afford to stay in this position for much longer. If they didn't break free now, they'd be torn apart. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, standing and moving to the helm. "Ree, target those dreadnoughts. I want every ounce of firepower we have focused on them. We need to cripple their lead ship before the second one gets in range." The crew immediately went to work, their movements a blur of practiced precision. Ree's fingers flew across her station, feeding coordinates to the targeting system. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew scrambled to keep the ship on course, evading incoming fire and weaving between asteroids to break the enemy's lock on their ship. "Target locked," Ree called out, her voice taut with concentration. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. The Vigilance unleashed its remaining energy into the lead dreadnought. A massive bolt of plasma shot out, slamming into the enemy ship's shields with an earth-shattering explosion. The shields held for a moment, but were quickly overwhelmed by the sustained barrage of fire from the Vigilance. The dreadnought's shields flickered and then collapsed entirely, allowing the plasma bolts to scorch its hull. The dreadnought staggered, listing to one side as it began to lose power, but it wasn't enough to take it out. The second dreadnought was still coming, and the Arachthi were closing in on all sides. Ilara's eyes darted to the tactical map. They were running out of time. "That wasn't enough," Ilara muttered under her breath. "We need to take them both down, now." The Vigilance shook again as more fire impacted their shields. Sparks flew from one of the rear consoles, and alarms blared louder, signaling a critical systems failure. The ship's engines sputtered, slowing their evasive maneuvers. Ree cursed under her breath as she struggled to compensate for the damage. "Captain, we've lost power to our aft thrusters," Ree exclaimed. "We can't keep our course steady much longer." Ilara's mind churned through their options. There was no way to outrun the Arachthi with their engines crippled, and the asteroid field was no longer an advantage. The enemy was adapting too quickly, predicting their movements with chilling accuracy. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel to escape pods," Ilara said, her voice low and filled with resolve. "I won't abandon this ship, but we can't afford to lose everyone. Get the crew to safety. We're going to make this count." The bridge crew's faces were a mixture of disbelief and determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew that if they didn't strike now, the Vigilance would be lost, and humanity's last hope would be shattered. Ilara turned back to the helm, her mind focused. There was one last desperate measure. The Vigilance was a flagship, equipped with a long-range missile array designed to be a last-resort weapon, a single strike that could cripple the heart of an enemy fleet. But it was a one-time use, and with their power systems failing, it had to be done now. "Lieutenant Hayes, initiate the countdown for the missile array," Ilara ordered. "We're going to launch everything we've got at the second dreadnought. Give us everything you've got." Hayes hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Understood, Captain. I'm activating the array now." A low hum filled the bridge as the targeting systems realigned, the ship's remaining power funneled into the missile array. A countdown flashed across the main screen. Firing in 5, 4, 3. Hayes's voice trembled with anticipation. Now, Ilara shouted, gripping the edge of the console as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The ship's bow erupted in a storm of energy, and the missile shot forward like a wave of death, streaking toward the second dreadnought. The enemy ship fired in retaliation, but it was too late. The missiles collided with the Arathi ship's hull, detonating in a series of massive explosions. The dreadnought's shields buckled under the weight of the strike, and its core erupted in a brilliant burst of light. For a moment, there was only the silence of space, broken only by the ringing in Ilara's ears. The dreadnought had been crippled, its central reactor destroyed. But they weren't out of danger yet. Shields down to 5%. Ree cried, her voice panicked. We can't take another hit like that. The Vigilance was running on fumes. The remaining enemy ships were closing in fast, and it wouldn't be long before the Arathi overwhelmed them completely. Ilara made a decision, one she hadn't hoped to make so soon. Prepare for a blind jump. Full throttle, she ordered, eyes narrowing in determination. We're getting out of here, and we're not looking back. As the Vigilance surged forward, the final remnants of their escape plan kicking into motion, Ilara held her breath. The odds were slim, but she was not ready to give up, not yet. The Vigilance lurched forward, its remaining engines barely holding together as Ilara ordered the ship into a blind jump. The ship's artificial gravity was flickering, and the bridge was dimming as the last reserves of power were drained into the jump drive. She could feel the tension in the air, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush them all. They were making a desperate bid for survival, but even if they escaped the immediate threat, the war wasn't over. It would never be over until the Arathi were stopped. Captain, Ree's voice came through, strained. We're ready to engage the jump drive, but we have minimal power left. If anything goes wrong. We don't have time for what-ifs, Ilara cut in. Do it. The countdown on the jump drive began, a low hum growing louder as the ship prepared to tear through space. Outside, the Arathi ships closed in, their weapons charged and aimed directly at the Vigilance. A final volley of energy slammed into their aft shields, causing the ship to shudder violently, sending sparks flying from every console. Jump in 3, 2, 1. Hayes's voice was tight as the jump drive activated with a deafening roar. The ship was thrust forward into the unknown, warping space around them as they plunged into the void. The bridge was plunged into complete darkness for a fraction of a second before the emergency lights flickered back on. The Vigilance lurched violently, throwing the crew from their seats as the jump drive strained against the ship's damaged systems. Ilara gritted her teeth, fighting to stay conscious as the ship's hull groaned under the pressure. She gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles turning white. Report, Ilara shouted, her voice hoarse. Jump complete, Captain, Ree answered, her voice shaking. But we've drifted far off course. We're in an uncharted sector. All systems are failing. Power levels are critical. Ilara stared at the tactical display in front of her, her heart sinking as she saw that they were deep within a starless void. There was no way to know exactly where they had ended up, no way to reach Earth, no way to contact the rest of humanity. The Arathi could still be tracking them, but for the moment, they were alone, completely alone. All right, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to overtake her. We need to find a way to restore power. Ree, scan the surrounding area for any habitable planets or resources we can use. We're not dead yet. The crew went to work, their focus sharpened by the grim reality of their situation. Ilara knew they couldn't afford to wait for help. The Vanguard was scattered, their forces crippled, and the Arathi would never stop hunting them. They had to find a way to turn the tide, to rally humanity's remaining forces before it was too late. Minutes passed in tense silence. The only sounds were the soft beeping of consoles and the steady breathing of the crew. But then Rhee's voice broke the silence, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Captain, I've detected a planet," Rhee said, her eyes wide. "It's within range, and it's got life signs. We're not alone." Ilara's eyes snapped to the screen. The image of the planet appeared, green and blue, with vast oceans and swirling cloud formations. It was a far cry from the barren wasteland she had expected, and the presence of life was a beacon of hope they desperately needed. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. "Life signs?" Ilara repeated. "What kind of civilization are we dealing with?" "I'm not sure, Captain," Rhee said, studying the data. "The readings are strange. It's unlike anything we've encountered before." Ilara's brow furrowed as she processed the information. "Prepare a landing party," she said, making a snap decision. "We'll need to investigate this planet. The Arakthi will be looking for us soon, and we can't risk staying in space. We'll need resources and allies if we're going to survive long enough to strike back." "Understood," Hayes replied, standing from his console. "We'll get the landing party ready. But Captain, we don't know what we're walking into down there." Ilara met his gaze with unshakable resolve. "We never do, but we can't afford to wait. We fight on our terms, or we don't fight at all." The crew began to prepare, gathering what little they could carry and checking the equipment for their descent. Ilara walked to the viewports and stared out into the vast emptiness, a dark ocean that stretched on forever. The Vigilance was battered and broken, but it was still alive, and as long as there was breath in her lungs, Ilara would fight. The planet below them loomed like a promise, a fragile hope in the midst of darkness. There was something down there, something alive, and if it could be harnessed, it could turn the tide of war in humanity's favor. "Set a course," Ilara commanded. "We make landfall. We see what this world has to offer." As the Vigilance began its descent toward the strange, unknown world below, Ilara's thoughts were consumed by the question that had been gnawing at her for hours. What had the Arakthi been hiding? What had they wanted so badly that they were willing to sacrifice everything for it? The answer, she realized, might be waiting for them on the surface. The Vigilance broke through the planet's atmosphere with a thunderous roar, the ship's hull groaning as it fought against the gravitational pull. Ilara could feel the heat rising, the friction from the descent rattling through her bones. It was a controlled descent, but it wasn't without peril. The ship's systems were damaged, and every shake threatened to send them plummeting to the unknown surface below. "Captain," Rhee called from her station, her voice filled with urgency. "We're entering the planet's lower atmosphere. The terrain is mountainous, dense with vegetation. There's a massive forest below, but we should be able to land within a clear zone in about 5 minutes." Ilara nodded, her eyes fixed on the viewports as the planet loomed larger. Despite the imminent danger, a strange calm washed over her. She had seen war, had faced death and destruction on the grandest scale. But now there was a different kind of battle ahead. The unknown, the potential allies or enemies waiting below. She had to make sure humanity would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. "Prep the landing gear," Ilara commanded. "All hands, brace for impact." The ship's engines flared to life as the crew braced themselves, holding onto their stations as the Vigilance descended toward the unfamiliar world. The violent shaking increased, and for a moment, it felt as though they were going to tear apart mid-flight. But the ship held together, and as they broke through the last layer of atmosphere, the ground below began to take shape. A vast expanse of green and brown spread out before them, marked by sweeping forests, towering trees, and a series of jagged mountain peaks in the distance. The area seemed untouched, wild, and untamed, the remnants of a world that had never been touched by industrialization. A faint haze clung to the landscape, giving it an otherworldly quality. "Approaching landing zone," Rhee said. "Engaging landing thrusters." With a final burst of energy, the Vigilance touched down on the planet's surface, its landing gear sinking into the soft earth with a heavy thud. The shaking ceased, and for a moment, there was only silence. The sound of the ship's systems winding down filled the air, but beyond that, there was nothing. No alarms, no enemy fire, just the serene stillness of a world untouched by war. Alara stood from her chair, a sense of urgency seizing her once more. "Prepare the landing party," she ordered, her voice sharp. "We're not here for sightseeing. We need to find resources, allies, or anything that can help us fight back against the Arachthi." Hayes, who had been silent until now, stood and gave a quick nod. "We'll be ready in 5 minutes, Captain, but we need to be cautious. We have no idea who or what is on this planet. The readings we got weren't clear." Alara's gaze lingered on the vast forest outside the viewport. She had been a soldier, a leader, but now she was something else entirely, humanity's last hope. She couldn't afford to hesitate. "Keep the ship powered up and ready for immediate takeoff if things go south," Alara said. "We'll need to move fast, and we don't know what we'll encounter. Stay sharp, everyone." The crew scattered quickly, gathering their gear and securing weapons as they prepared to disembark. Alara strapped on her own combat gear, her pulse quickening as the adrenaline of the unknown set in. The planet was beautiful, but that didn't mean it was safe. The Arachthi had found something here, something worth protecting with all their might. And it was up to Alara and her crew to uncover the truth. As the airlock hissed open, Alara stepped out onto the planet's surface. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and vegetation, fresh and untouched. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above, casting dappled shadows across the ground. The world felt alive, brimming with possibilities and danger in equal measure. The rest of the landing party followed her out, weapons at the ready, scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. The trees were vast, their trunks wide and gnarled, their leaves rich with green hues. Strange, colorful flora sprouted along the edges of the landing zone, their bioluminescent blooms casting eerie glows as the team moved forward. "Stay alert," Alara instructed, her voice low and measured. "We don't know who or what is watching us." As they moved deeper into the forest, the hum of the planet's wildlife filled the air, a symphony of chirping insects, distant calls from unknown creatures, and the occasional rustle of movement in the underbrush. But there was no sign of any hostile force, human or otherwise. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then, as they made their way through a thicket of trees, a strange structure came into view. Half buried under vines and moss, it was an ancient, towering stone edifice, its surface etched with intricate markings that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It looked like a ruin, an artifact of a civilization long forgotten. Alara's heart skipped a beat. This was no natural formation. Someone had built this. "Get a scan of this structure," she ordered, her pulse racing with anticipation. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Moved swiftly to the front, scanning the structure with her portable device. Her eyes widened as the results came in. "Captain," said, her voice tight with awe, This is alien architecture. It's not of human origin. And the readings, it's emitting a signal. A faint one, but it's there." Alara's thoughts raced. The Arachthi hadn't just been hunting them. They'd been looking for something. And this structure, hidden in the heart of the planet, was the key. "This is it," Alara murmured. "This is what they were after. We need to uncover its secrets. It's our only chance." The Vigilance had crash-landed on a world that held the answer to humanity's survival and the future of the war. The reckoning was just beginning.